things. In this one, we're gonna draw how the aggregate demand curve looks. Usually, it looks something like this. It is downward sloping, and of course, it's drawn like this in the first quadrant of this xy axis, you might call it, where the horizontal, which would be in mathematics x-axis, is all about q, which I will explain in a second, and then the vertical one is about p, or PL. So what that means is basically aggregate demand curve studies the relationship, and by the way, an inverse relationship between the price level in an economy and the real GDP. To quickly explain what these two things mean, it would maybe be useful to say price level basically talks about the general average price level of services and goods in an economy. That means with, for example, inflation, when in general all prices rise at the same time, the price level will go up from one point to another point on this axis. Here, this is 0 for both x and y, so price level 0. And of course, we usually operate, or what we are studying are points not at these absolutely 0 values and so on. But let's say you're going to be looking here, for example, or here, comparing to here. Now, as this is inversely proportional to the other property that the curve studies, or the other attribute, or the other axis that this is about, which is Q, and therefore this is the shortcut for real GDP. We should also explain real GDP. So real GDP, it's all the goods produced plus services, all that is sold in the economy, that is produced and sold in the economy. Now, it doesn't really care about the exact price level because it is connected to the price level by this curve, by this aggregate demand curve. That studies the relationship between the two and shows how it is inverse. But on the other hand, the real GDP is all about basically the amount of production of those things. Okay, so how much is produced? Let's say if there was in our economy 5,000 of goods A of those same, let's say 100 houses built versus 200 houses built. In both cases, there will be a scenario, imagine scenario where that is all that is produced in the economy. Then those 100 houses versus those 200 houses built will be just one half of those 100 houses will be one half the real GDP compared to the 200 houses. That's the idea. And then aggregate demand curve basically talks about all these different points that we can be at. Now, there's another relationship which is strongly connected to this idea, and that says P. It says that nominal GDP, or you can just say, for shortcut, you can say nominal GDP, maybe write it like this, is going to be P times Q. Okay? And that means that the price level times the total output of the economy, okay, will equal to the nominal GDP. Now, that means that if we take some point on this curve and we draw this rectangle, sometimes it's going to be a square as well, we draw this rectangle, then the area of it will be basically this value, that's the Q, and this value that the point has, the P. Therefore, the area numerically will be equal to what the nominal GDP is. So if we take a point on this curve and we project right below the point onto the x-axis, onto the horizontal Q1, and left 90 degrees to the horizontally project to the P, then the area enclosed by these two lines and the axis, so this area in this case, that will be equal to the nominal GDP. Why? Because there is this relationship that nominal GDP is equal to price level times total output of the economy, in other words, real GDP. And that also talks in the way that, or basically shows us the fact that if we write this in a more comparative manner, let's say. Price, I will say price level as PL, and Q, I will say real GDP. So we see the relationship here. Now we can divide both sides by our GDP, the real GDP, by the Q. I just wrote Q in a different way. Now that talks about the quotient or the ratio between, the ratio or the quotient of nominal GDP and real GDP being the price level index. So you see that the higher the nominal GDP is compared to price level, the higher the price level index will be. And this is just one of many relationships that you can find here. But for an introduction, I think all that was presented here is enough. Just to sum up once again, we were talking about the aggregate demand curve. That is in its basic form right here on this diagram. It sums up all the possible points. Okay, so we are always talking about one of the points. Let's say we chose this one, but we might have also chosen and the rectangle we just used for visualizing the idea, one of the ideas that were presented. We chose this point, but we might have also chosen this point. All the possible combinations of a certain quantity of output, total output, and the price level. And you see the basic tendency that the higher the price level goes, the lower the total output will be. And also in reverse, the lower the price level goes, the higher the output will be. That means the economy can maximize production with a low price level. And it can minimize the production also when it goes to very high price levels. But that's a generalization. And there's so much you can observe with it, and we will work with this far more. So from this basic introduction, remember two things. And that is, with rising price levels, you're going to decrease the output. Because for the same point, you're hitting it already at the horizontally lower level. You're hitting it already here. That means the real GDP, the Q, will be lower. Then if we go further out, well, that means at lower price level, you see, we're going to drop to lower price level. So for example, at this price level, which is far lower, so if prices are far lower, we're going to have a higher output. So these two ideas are the most important to remember from this.